From Mamma Mia, welcome to The Spill, your daily pop culture fix. I'm Ksenia Lukic.
And I'm Laura Brodnick.
So on the show today, Laura has been fiercely reading the new Gwyneth biography by Amy Odell, and we're going to dive deep into that and get all of the goss.
But first, well, I hope you're all happy, because after all your complaining and nagging and just like that, has been, well, not cancelled. I'm going to go ahead and say it's been cancelled because it is now ending after season 3. Showrunner Michael Patrick King has confirmed.
I feel like we kind of saw it coming, and there was so many people who were hate watching it.
Yes. I mean, I personally wasn't hate watching it.
Neither was I.
Yes. No, I know. Here's the thing. Like, obviously, when it came out in its first season, the numbers were super high. I think it was like for HBO Max, like the biggest debut for their digital platform. And the numbers have continued to drop season after season, but they were still holding quite steady because I guess they had that fan base of people watching and also the people who hate watching it.
I actually feel like it was hitting its stride a little bit more in season 3. I thought
Me too.
Particularly with Charlotte, like Kristen Davis got so much flack, and I've said this before, for being like not very good in season 1, but I feel like she's like really gotten better, and I was starting to really love the Lisa, and I was starting to, like, I thought it was starting to hit its stride. I feel like maybe Michael Patrick King was like, let's just end it here. We're done. Like, let's not beat a dead horse.
Yeah, the announcement. Okay, I have some questions around the whole cancellation thing because I don't think it's as smooth and artistic as they're saying. So Michael Patrick King said that as he was writing the finale of season 3, he just felt that it came to a very natural, beautiful stopping point, and he was like, let's end it there. It's kind of interesting because they kept that mostly a secret from the cast and crew until this week, where they kind of found out along with everyone else. So they haven't formally said that, but Deadline, the industry publication, has talked to a lot of people behind the scenes and said that cast were very blindsided, which I kind of got from Kristen Davis, who plays Charlotte, from her post saying that she was really heartbroken that the show was coming to an end and she would miss everyone. It felt like she just heard the news.
And it doesn't surprise me that much, because I think sometimes with these sorts of productions there are snap decisions, and it could have potentially come from HBO Max. Like, they either cut the budgets, because the budgets for the clothes are a huge part.
It's an expensive show to make. Also, just all the outdoor scenes, the extras. That's why recently I feel people have been saying why it looks like they have no friends, because all the scenes of them in groups are like really tiny. There's no one else in the cafes. There's no one else in their houses. They're trying to cut the extra budget down.
Yeah, it's very expensive to shoot in New York. Like, it is very, very expensive. I feel like, the statement from SJP, she wrote like a poem.
Oh my God, that thing. I love her on Instagram. I just love everything about the whimsical way she writes. I love her commitment to saying rabbit, rabbit on the first day of every month, or she thinks her whole life will fall apart. That statement from her needs to be studied at like a Harvard level. The twists, the turns, everything she's saying. It's very poetic.
My favorite part from it was about Carrie. She said, I've been frustrated, condemned, and rooted for her, which I thought was interesting, because there was always so much criticism around Carrie, but I don't think I've heard her criticize Carrie before.
Oh, Sarah Jessica Parker.
Yeah.
Oh, no, she has. I mean, you've got to think this is like well over 30 years.
Yeah.
Like, she has obviously not agreed with things that she's done. But she's always been wildly protective of her, mostly. But, she's called her out for things like you would, like kind of like you call out a girlfriend from being like, that was a bad move. So, I don't know. I just feel really, again, I have criticisms of the show, and there's bits that I've loved, and we'll get more into this when we do our Brutally Honest review at the end of the season. But I just really hate the idea of living in a world without Carrie Bradshaw, and that's kind of because they won't come back after this. Like, this is it.
Yeah, this is it. And there was because I rewatched Sex and the City, and then I was like, okay, so we've got 6 seasons, 2 movies, and 3 seasons of And Just Like That. And
not enough.
That's
I'm not even joking. That's not enough. Only because
it.
I don't know about you, but I've watched Sex and the City so many times over and over and over again. I like burnt it into my brain too much to the point where I need a little bit of a break. So that's why I've been watching And Just Like That over and over and over again. Sounds like I have a lot of time on my hands, but sometimes you get home super late at night and you need a little hour decompress before you go to bed. Like, I can't consume new material in that time. I need to comfort watch something, and the characters characters. Even when Just Like That has been bad, these characters are my comfort watch.
Yeah.
So I don't love that they're going away.
I did miss Kim Cattrall, and I do.
What did you think of her post?
Cryptic as hell.
That was pointed. There's no one on earth who can convince me.
It was very much like, oh, big week. Like, it just, I don't know. But I feel like if that relationship had been better and Kim had come back, it would have been different.
It would have been different, but I still think that the people would have had critiques on her character. People would have had critiques on her, the way that her character has changed. I think the storylines in the world, like this world they created exists outside of any kind of comedy drama on TV. It's created its own kind of fantasy world. And I think she would have been written into that. People even had issues with her cameo, even though she made a callback to like an excellent Samantha storyline from season 6 with her, you know, her English persona and all that sort of stuff. People still had issues with her tiny second cameo and the fact that sometimes it didn't feel like Samantha or she was putting on a voice and she was only on screen for like 3 minutes. So I feel like they definitely would have had an issue with her in this show as well. But yeah, there's nothing anyone can do to convince me that that post of her saying end of a long week, love heart, all that sort of stuff wasn't a dig at the show getting cancelled. Because she's so online and every time anything happens within Just Like That or Sarah Jessica Parker, she does something. She releases campaigns at the same time. She releases shows. She puts out statements, never directly kind of targeting them, but always in that world. Like just what she does.
Laura, you know, you said something at the beginning, but I feel like given your love of Sex and the City, you need to end it with your final thought.
Oh, yes. Let's bring this back full circle from the top of this segment. I do hope you're all happy because I just do think that a lot of the criticism and anger and ridicule might have contributed to this decision because Michael Patrick King and Sarah Jessica Parker, the other thing, did Sarah Jessica Parker not tell the other actresses that it was ending? She's been keeping that in this long. Is that going to be another feud? I'm just going to say right now, I'm personally, I can't handle that if these women aren't friends, so they better sort that shit out. But yes, everyone who ridiculed the show, you got what you wanted. I hope you're happy. And you've devastated me and everyone else.
So Laura has been painstakingly reading Gwyneth's book by Amy Odell, which came out last week. I have only had the chance to just sort of skim through a couple of the sections. So you're going to kind of be leading this, but I really, and something that I didn't see coming out in a lot of the extracts before we got the book is her childhood. Like, I don't think I realized how much of a, I mean, I knew she was a Nepo baby, but I didn't think I knew how much of a silver spoon she had.
Yes, she did grow up very, very wealthy. So her father was film producer Bruce Paltrow. Her mother was an actress, Blythe Danner, who was meant to be sort of when she started out like the biggest movie star in the world. Like she was beating out Meryl Streep for roles, but she hated, which is so interesting looking at where Gwyneth ended up, she hated the fame and like the glare of publicity and she hated doing press junkets. So she kind of moved away from that. And what's interesting is that when Gwyneth was young, she'd be asked if she wanted to be an actress like her mother, Gwyneth Paltrow, and she would say, no, I want to be a movie star like Meryl Streep. So she kind of did want that fame from early on. Can I just say at the start of the book, so it chronicles from like the day, it starts with like her parents' backstories and how they found fame and how they fell in love working on a play together and their backstory. It goes into Gwyneth being born and then follows her all the way to present day. My biggest takeaway from the start of the book is that Gwyneth Paltrow as a teenager, terrifying. Like I'm having nightmares about this girl and ever coming across her and having to deal with her.
I know. The bit that I got through was that first bit because that's the bit that fascinates me the most. And the bit where she was like, where someone asked her if she thought she was going to be famous. She's like, no, I know I am.
But that even like the growing up, like, yeah, she grew up rich. She grew up around a lot of privilege. She grew up acting in these like very specialized, you know, summer camp programs with her parents where other people had to come and audition. But if you were the child of someone, like they weren't even hiding the nepotism. If you were the child of someone, you progressed through the acting camp system and all these sorts of things. And because she was so beautiful and kind of got away with everything and had this charmed life, like when she was in high school, she was smoking like a pack of cigarettes a day, which she did all the way through her 20s. I was like, I know she's super happy now, but I'm like, how is that woman still standing? And her dad was friends with Madonna. So when she was in high school, Madonna wrote her a letter and was like, hey, Gwyneth, like, cool girls live longer and they don't smoke. And Gwyneth took it to school and like presented it to the class, framed it, put it in her bedroom and kept smoking. Like that's the kind of life she was living.
And then she went through like some weird kleptomaniac phase where she was like stealing
when
stuff
she was
at school.
when she was a kid, she would steal stuff, which again, a lot of kids do. I'm pretty sure I did. Actually, I had a lot of weird things where I'm like, I was reading Gwyneth's life and thinking this actually mirrors back to me, which is weird.
One time I stole a lollipop from our local corner store. I came home. My mum and dad found it. They drove me back up to the corner store. I was in tears at this point. Walked me in and made me return it and apologized profusely for taking it. And then I never took anything again.
Well, I don't think Gwyneth had quite that reaction because when her parents came in for her stealing, they were just like, oh, you know, she's got a younger brother now. She's not feeling the center of attention. And her dad was like, oh, she'll be okay kind of thing.
I think the biggest thing I think that really shaped Gwyneth as a woman is the daddy's girl of it all.
Yes, there's a lot of that throughout the book, which is something she's spoken about so much. And it's interesting because like going through like both of her parents' stories come into those first few chapters of the book. Like there's her mum moving them all to like a completely different state so they could attend like a nicer school, and her dad being like very kind of like very worried that she wasn't very smart in school and like what was going to happen to her and all these sorts of things. And also him like forbidding her from going out and smoking, going out to parties all night, going to raves, dating these boys. Like she was like quite a wild child as a teenager, which doesn't fit with her kind of persona now. But yeah, the stuff with her at school, they interviewed, she's still friends with a lot of her high school friends, so they wouldn't be interviewed for the book really, except to give like a few little platitudes here and there. But other girls at school would talk about like her first day at this really fancy prep school. She came in this outfit that she had selected and it kind of didn't hit the mark. The cool girls didn't want to be with her and didn't want to be friends with her. So she slipped out after school and then came back in this like really cool outfit. So she went home and like completely redid her image and came back, and the cool girls accepted her, and they talked about the girl in the striped shirt who they weren't sure about, and that was her, but she had remade herself like in one afternoon to be accepted. And then she kind of took over and became their leader, and like she would freeze different people out, and she was like moving.
She would have bullied me hard.
She would have, she wouldn't have even looked of my direction, which is kind of making me feel safe, like in a safer zone of like these mind games that she would play with her friends.
But this is kind of the benefit of the Australian school system and like the English school system where everyone has to wear school uniforms.
Oh, 100%.
Because there is none of that. Like everybody has to wear the same thing. Sure, some girls are going to hike their skirts up a little bit or taper things in, or I used to roll my sleeves up, which was very much not allowed, or leave my top button undone. But that I feel like it's a bit of an equalizer, whereas in American schools it's so much more obvious.
Yeah, exactly. Especially this, I guess like everyone at this particular school was like very wealthy and came from these different backgrounds. So like there was that level playing field there. But Gwyneth kind of like ascended to be the queen bee. And apart from like deciding who was in and who was out and like kind of sometimes isolating people, she also just had this thing where she like didn't care. Like there's this story that one of her classmates tells about them standing in the locker room, putting their swimmers on to go and do PE, and all the girls hated this like green swimsuit they had to wear. It was really unflattering and they hated putting them on, but Gwyneth loved putting hers on because she would just like put it on because she was so beautiful. And she said that she looked over at this other girl who she wasn't friends with and looked her up and down, like stared at her in the eye and then said, "Isn't it interesting how everyone's body is different?"
Oh.
And then like walked away. And this girl is like, I still think about it to this day. I don't want to paint this like, because again, I have read the whole book now. I don't want to paint this like Gwyneth as evil because there's a lot of lovely stuff in there about her.
I think that comes from being so spoiled rotten by your father.
Yeah.
And he really did. He and her brother, Jake, was kind of ignored. Like he didn't, like he's still in the industry, he's around, but I think that Gwyneth was very much the golden child. Like, you know, Bruce took her to Paris for, you know, I want to be the one to take you to Paris. I want to be the one to give you everything. And I think she was really spoiled in that moment. And I'm not saying that people don't grow up and change, but that is such a crux of her her upbringing is that confidence that she received at a very early age.
Yes, absolutely. It's kind of like this from the setup of the book, Amy Odell, like before she gets into Gwen's early life, she talks a bit about the setup and why she wanted to do the book. And one of the things that she says, it's just a passing sentence, but it's really stayed with me, is that she talks about coming off doing the Anna Wintour book where she interviewed hundreds of people who knew Anna Wintour or worked for her to get the information for the book. And then she said she went and did the same thing for Gwyneth, interviewed hundreds of people. And the interesting thing was that she said she interviewed a block of Vogue staff members and then a block of Goop staff members anonymously. And she said the Goop staff members were much more terrified of being found out, of what they would say. They were a lot more cautious and they really feared repercussions from Gwyneth because they said she is known for if she thinks you've wronged her or she turns against you, and even now as an adult, for taking you down and kind of having this way of being able to shut you out or take revenge, but in this really quiet way where she's removed from it. And it's just like this tiny, like few passing sentences in this huge book. But I just think it's so interesting because everyone sees Anna Wintour as the hard one, as the maybe vengeful one, as, you know, the kind of behind the glass is very cold. And I just think it's interesting that Gwyneth Paltrow behind the scenes is the more feared boss. And I should say, like, I've read the whole book now, and there's not any big, huge, scandalous reveals that we kind of already didn't know about her life, which I think is what a lot of people wanted. But what I think is all like the little stories that are sprinkled through it about these big moments that were like maybe public but just hadn't been told before. But yeah, it's interesting as she kind of became a movie star, she was very much like not wanting to be famous. It's like she went to her mother's way for a little bit where she wanted to be a really serious actress. She was chasing down these very serious roles. People would say she would come on to set like very prepared, but also like coming from this like privileged world, that she would say like she wanted to sit in the assistant director's chair while she was watching her mother do a scene. So he just had to move and he went outside and was like, that's my chair. But they just had to do it. Also in the book, it's linked to, like, you don't want to define her by her romances, these big public stories that she's had, but they are kind of the bookmarks of her career. And she said in so many interviews, which I hadn't kind of picked up before, is that she thinks that she actually became famous, and people say this as well, that she actually has become famous over time for her romances, not her roles, which I thought is interesting because when I look back, I never see Gwyneth Paltrow as like someone who's been defined by a boyfriend, but she kind of was for 20 years.
I see that. I know she won the Oscar and she's obviously been in a lot of movies, but I do tend to agree with that a little bit. It's almost like it kind of reminds me of, you know, your Elizabeth Hurley and your Versace dress with Hugh Grant. Like that was her moment and then she became like that. And I feel like Gwyneth with Brad, with Ben Affleck, like that kind of each time she dated someone more famous, it escalated her career more and more and more.
Yes, because they talk about, so she in the book it talks about the fact that she was trying out for all these roles and she kept losing to like Julia Ormond or other actresses at the time who were maybe a bit more prevalent than her. But she did a screen test with Brad Pitt for Legends of the Fall and they had great chemistry. So he was the one who wanted her on Seven. And that obviously she was already an actress that kind of catapulted her to fame in a different way because she and Brad became this kind of duo where she would do a lot more, like it's talked about in the book that she would go and do a lot more press because people wanted her to talk about Brad. And because she was so young, she would just give all these details about their relationship and they would go and pose together and she would bring him to an event and things like that, not kind of realizing how intense the whole thing was. It's kind of interesting because she was only 22 and he was like 33 when he proposed to her. And in the book, it's like it comes out of nowhere. And then they had this kind of back and forth over their age gap, which I feel is like we kind of thought they broke up because she thought he was like not in her league, which comes out in the book as well. But it also is this thing of like he was in his 30s, he was ready to settle down and have kids, and she was like kind of just starting her career.
Do we hear anything else? Because I didn't get to these chapters. Do we hear anything else about the later loves of her life, particularly like Chris Martin and Ben Affleck?
Actually, it's so interesting how it's, you know, how kind of like we thought when Taylor Swift released her album it was going to be all about Joe Alwyn because they'd been together for ages, but it was mostly about Matty Healy because he's the one that kind of like stuck in her world a bit more. I feel like for Gwyneth Paltrow, that's Ben Affleck with, I kind of realized how tumultuous their relationship was. I guess she kept it more private. Like she said, like there's quotes from Ben Affleck saying they would go to events and people would say, can we take a photo of you together? And that he would say, no, sorry, Gwyneth said no. Like Gwyneth said no to this. Like she was the one who was kind of calling the shots. And I kind of understand that because there's these stories of like how intense the fandom around her and Brad Pitt was, not just from the press, but from the public, that they would just get followed everywhere by, you know, fans who were obsessed with them being together. And there's this one story in the book where they were traveling. And so they were in this hotel, they had security guards outside, and the throng of people outside, the fans who found out they were there, kept growing and growing and growing. And then this one woman like scaled the fence and snuck into the hotel and like got into their room. And all of a sudden, like it's just like Brad Pitt and Gwyneth Paltrow in this room, and this young woman appears and everyone starts screaming and security comes in. And this is where I kind of, if this story is true, it made me like Gwyneth Paltrow, because apparently she was obviously quite shocked because there was a stranger in her hotel room with Brad. But then she clocked that it was a teenage girl, and the security guard was like grabbing her and pulling her. And so apparently Gwyneth like ran across the room and like pulled the security guards off the young girl and was like shielding her and trying to protect her and being like, she's not trying to hurt her. She's not crazy. She's so young. Like she didn't know what she was doing. I'm sure the girl like got into the hotel and was like, shit, I didn't think this was going to happen. What do I do now? And so I think that level of fame for them kind of made her keep her Ben Affleck relationship out of the press, like to an extent.
I think, I mean, I love that. And I think that that's probably one of the things that, not that this is ever an option for me, but that level of fame is so terrifying, because you just, like, people can be a little, and you don't know whether it is, I think teenage girls is one thing, but you don't know whether it is as obsessive stalker, like murdery vibes, or it's just someone who is so in love with you and thinks they know you and thinks that they have a relationship with you, and like a teenage girl. So I do respect that she kind of took that and said, let's just all take a breath here. Because I think the initial reaction would be like, take her down, get her out, we need safety. But I think Gwen is seeing past that and going, oh, she's just a girl who loves Brad.
Yeah. And look, at the time, didn't we all? It's kind of interesting when she talks about meeting Ben Affleck. It was kind of this idea that she'd finally met someone who was her equal, which is kind of interesting because I always think of Ben Affleck as like more of that kind of like, he talks about growing up on the streets of Boston and like this rough upbringing and like being in high school, and him and Matt Damon like hatching plans to be famous and all this sort of stuff. But when Gwyneth Paltrow met him, and I guess this kind of is probably true, she was like, he grew up in Cambridge, he came from a more educated background, he knew about the things, he knew about literature, he knew about worldly things. And after having to like train Brad Pitt in caviar and all these sorts of things, and there's also this story where like she had organized for her and Brad Pitt to go visit like these beautiful spots in Russia and stuff, and he was late, he missed the like deadline for them to go in, and so she was just, I think she hated Brad Pitt so, reading between the lines, she hated Brad Pitt so much in their last year of being engaged.
I mean, I get it, and I think like classism and you know, difference in the way that you were brought up, that I completely understand that. It just gives me the ick a little bit.
I mean, I don't know. Like, it just,
I understand it though. I do understand it. When you're brought up in a certain way and someone doesn't follow the rules that have become innate in you, you don't even have to think about them anymore.
Yeah. I just love this idea of like seeing like Gwyneth and Brad Pitt being like the hottest couple in the world, and everyone's obsessed with them. They're planning this big wedding, and her being like, I just hate being alone with you is just so funny. But she was obsessed with Ben Affleck. She met him. She thought he was the smartest person that she'd met. He thought, and the other thing is he thought she was the smartest woman he'd ever dated at that time. And she talks about like, as much as he kind of ignored her a lot, and it's like he's playing really hot and cold with her. Like Ben Affleck in his like 20s and 30s working at a level that is like quite intense with his dating life.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But what about Chris Martin? I want to know a little bit more about the Coldplay years.
That's an interesting one because she went back and forth. I mean, she obviously dated lots of other people, but Ben Affleck was kind of her like other big public romance. They broke up, they got back together. She called him to do a movie with her because she was like, that's where our relationship is right now. Like the intensity of them kind of, and I think they actually broke up and got back together more than we even know in the public eye, kind of from the book is that they just kept trying to make it work because they were so drawn to each other. And she says so many times how good the sex was over and over again. Like that's the one thing that she wants on the record. She met Chris Martin obviously they were together for a long time and they had 2 kids together, and she talks about like motherhood kind of stripping her ambition for a while, but also that he was just like this really safe landing space for her after her father died, because that was that was such a huge trauma in her life, and she was feeling like very burned by the industry and just wanting this safe place, and Chris Martin kind of was that for her. It's also interesting how much she saw her divorce from him as a failure, which is something I didn't really know about her as much. So in the book they get into the whole like Goop situation, which is also interesting because her wellness kind of like addiction, I thought always stemmed from this idea, and I think it does to a way, it always stemmed from this idea of her wanting to like look a certain way because, you know, she said publicly and she said through the book as well that looking unhealthy, being overweight, looking tired are her like biggest kind of fears that she has. But in the early days of starting her wellness empire and Goop, she told like her close family and friends that cancer had taken everything from her. It had taken her loved ones. She lived with this really intense fear. She talks about like hosting this lunch in her backyard and feeling her hand go numb and getting a headache and thinking that she was dying, and hearing her kids play in the yard and thinking, what if I got so sick I couldn't look after them? And afterwards the doctor was like, it wasn't a stroke, it was probably like a bit of a migraine accentuated by a panic attack. But she then went on this whole big thing where she went to all these different gurus and health people and doctors like looking for some sort of a like something to like make her never think that she was going to die again. And so I think the whole Goop thing is very linked to this like fear she has of dying or being unwell, or someone in her life being unwell. So she turned to all these like alternative medicines and was like, if I just eat this and I drink this, then I'll live forever and so will my family.
And look, she's not the first person to do this. You know, Eastern medicine has been around for thousands of years. We know that. But, you know, those were the bait hitting stories, you know, the vaginal steaming and the jade, lots of vagina stuff and vagina candles. And I mean, all of that stuff, you know, was so tied up in her brand and so baity. But she has really built an empire, and before a lot of other people jumped onto that train in terms of commercializing it.
Yeah, exactly. Which again, so it's like throughout the book, because they've interviewed so many different people, they talk about her wanting to like monetize it and make all this money and everything like that. But it's also just, it was linked to this idea of her also wanting to build a business. And it's kind of interesting because the story that she tells publicly is this whole thing of like, she didn't really know what she was doing and she had to Google like business phrases under the table. Whereas behind the scenes, people were saying that she's a lot more involved and a lot more like, not that she knew what she was doing, but she's kind of like was trying to be the boss behind the scenes in a really intense way. There's not that much stuff in there also in the book about like her, like there's obviously like behind the scenes of parties and stuff, but it's more her like kind of granular life around kind of like, building her business or being a mother or like how she reacted to scandals. But there are a few stories. You know how we talked about the Madonna story, how her friendship with Madonna broke up and that made headlines when the excerpts from the book came out. There's also a story in there about how she and Minnie Driver stopped being friends.
Oh.
Yeah, and also the Winona Ryder stuff. Like, there's so
Minnie
much.
Driver and Ben Affleck were in.
Yeah. So no, that's a story. So this is kind of what I was interested in. Again, not that I think like she's got a lot of her same friends that she's had since primary school. So I'm not saying that she's like a bad person and she can't keep friends. But I think there was such a spotlight on the years over her romantic relationship with stars, but also these big celeb friendships. So in the book, they say that like it was at holiday that Madonna like invited herself on, came to dinner, screamed at her daughter, and Chris Martin's like, we're never seeing her again, she's toxic. So even though Gwyneth had been like friends with her since she was a child and she was kind of like a godmother to her, that relationship ended. And then the Winona Ryder thing ended because over the Shakespeare in Love script, which the book says that Gwyneth was offered, she barely read the script because she'd just done Emma. And she had actually put Winona Ryder's name forward from it. This is the only part of the book I feel like Gwyneth's involved in. She was like, I want this rumor crushed, and she's somehow like planted this. And then the movie came around to her again and she took it. So there was no way that she was trying to take Winona Ryder down as her official story. But in the book, so yes, Minnie Driver Driver had been cast in Good Will Hunting, which was Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's big first movie they worked on, won an Oscar, this huge kind of story of these like two young guys from Boston making this incredible movie. On the movie, Matt Damon and Minnie Driver started dating. They were together for a while. So it was this like foursome in Hollywood. It was Matt and Minnie and then Ben and Gwen. Great couple names. And then after a while, Matt kind of started to want to break up with Minnie Driver. And apparently, I would love Minnie Driver's take on this because apparently Gwyneth hated her. She called her an air kiss friend. And one of the interesting things from the book is that if Gwyneth doesn't like someone, she makes a vomit face behind them when they talk.
Oh,
is
God.
that not the... And it's like, it's brought up in the early years when she's in her 20s. And I was like, maybe that's something she did in her 20s.
I'm scared of her.
I'm so scared of her. I just never want to be around her. And I also love her. It's so weird. And then at the end of the book, they're talking about her being in meetings with people in Goop, not doing things that she doesn't like and how she would kind of push people out and they would come and resign and she'd be like, oh, you're leaving? Oh, no, bye, kind of thing. And then as soon as they leave, they're like, Gwyneth would do her signature vomit face. And I was like, what? She's still doing that in her 50s? Which is honestly iconic behavior. So apparently every time she would call Minnie Driver an air kiss friend, like someone that she would air kiss but would never engage with, and would make the vomit face behind her every time she talked.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. Is this because I feel like we've been quite scathing. Is Amy Odell telling a true story on this? Is this a takedown? Like, is this an honest representation?
Think it's a very fair. I didn't end the book disliking Gwyneth Paltrow. I finished the book terrified of her, but I also finished the book she's just an interesting person.
Absolutely.
But it was so funny because like in the Minnie Driver part, the point where she broke up with Matt Damon was not kind of orchestrated by Gwyneth because Matt wanted to break up with her, and so Minnie left the house that day and came back and she got mugged. So Matt had comforted her, and Gwyneth's like, she's lying, she didn't get mugged, and like then made Ben Affleck agree with her. And then the next day she said she got mugged again, and Gwyneth's like, sorry, she's absolutely lying. And then kind of like that relationship broke down. They've never spoken since. And I just kind of think it's funny that there's this line from like that behavior through to kind of like the end behavior of her now. But the book kind of finishes on this note where it's like she's married now to Brad Falchuk. Apparently they're very happy. There was an insinuation that she was with Brad at the same time she broke up with Chris Martin. But it's really interesting because that's the time where Amy Odell jumps in and says, I couldn't find anyone to verify that rumor. So it is just a rumor.
Out of 5 jade eggs, what do you give the Gwyneth Paltrow biography?
Look, maybe 4. 4 if you're already interested in her to a certain extent. If you're not interested in her, you won't care about this book. If there's an interest in her in some way, this is a good read.